Asylum Inc. presents The Doctor's Findings. The Hollowing. The limestone walls wept perpetually in the caverns of St. Bartholomew, though the faithful called it divine perspiration. Noah Lucas had descended through 300 feet of flooded passages to reach this place, his diving equipment now discarded at the submerged entrance, like the shed skin of some mechanical serpent. The air tasted of minerals and something else, something organic that clung to the back of his throat with the persistence of guilt. The rescue call had come through emergency channels 14 hours ago. 23 members of the Subterranean Church of the Divine Hollow had ceased all surface contact. Their compound, built within a vast natural chamber fed by underground springs, had been purchased legally 5 years prior. Until yesterday, they had maintained regular communication with suppliers and family members above. Then, silence. Lucas picked his way through the main cavern, his headlamp casting wavering shadows that seemed to retreat only reluctantly. The cult had carved living spaces directly into the rock walls, crude but functional dwellings that opened like wounds in the stone. Electrical cables snaked along the ceiling, powered by a hydroelectric generator that hummed somewhere in the darkness with mechanical persistence. The first body lay curled beside what had once served as an altar, a natural formation of flowstone that resembled, with disturbing accuracy, an open mouth. The corpse belonged to a middle-aged woman whose fingers were stained with her own blood. Her mouth had been carved away, leaving behind a ragged cavity that descended far deeper into her skull than anatomy should have permitted. The wound was precise, surgical, as though she had worked with infinite care to hollow herself out entirely. Scattered around the altar were crude tools, kitchen knives honed to razor sharpness, dental instruments that gleamed with meticulous cleanliness, and fragments of bone that Lucas recognized with mounting nausea as pieces of human jaw. A notebook lay open beside the woman's outstretched hand, its pages covered in spidery handwriting that grew increasingly erratic toward the final entries. Day 847. The voice grows stronger. Brother Samuel achieved communion yesterday. His offering was accepted. The cavity behind his teeth reaches down, down, down. We understand now that we are vessels, not vessels to be filled, but vessels to be emptied. God does not wish to enter us. God wishes us to become the entrance. Day 851. Sister Margaret has begun the work. The screaming stopped at dawn. She begs now, but not for mercy. She begs to be completed. Her mouth is a doorway, and something stirs on the other side. Day 856. The children understand better than we do. Little Timothy sees it clearly. We were never meant to speak to God. We were meant to become the spaces through which God might whisper. Lucas's hands trembled as he turned the pages, each entry more fevered than the last. The handwriting deteriorated into barely legible scratches, then into symbols and what seemed to be an incomprehensible language. He found the camera equipment in what had served as their meeting hall. 3 video cameras on tripods surrounded a circle carved into the stone floor, their lenses focused on a space that was conspicuously empty, save for dark stains that had soaked deep into the porous rock. The cameras were still recording. The first tape showed the cult in what appeared to be a state of religious ecstasy. Men and women knelt within the carved circle, their faces turned upward toward the cavern ceiling in poses of supplication. Their mouths moved in unison, but no sound emerged from the recording equipment. They were speaking, or trying to speak, but their words created no vibration in the air. Brother Samuel stepped forward in the recording, his face serene with terrible purpose. He raised one of the sharpened knives and, without hesitation, began to carve. The blade slid through the flesh of his cheek with the ease of cutting butter, peeling away layers of skin and muscle to reveal the yellowed bone beneath. Blood flowed, but Samuel's expression never changed. His eyes remained fixed on something beyond the camera's range, something that filled him with rapture even as he methodically destroyed himself. Others followed his example. Sister Margaret took up a dental probe and began the delicate work of extracting her own teeth, each molar removed with surgical precision before she moved on to the more complex task of reshaping her jaw. Her face became a ruin, but her eyes blazed with religious fervor. She was begging, Lucas realized with dawning horror. Her mangled mouth was trying to form words of supplication, pleading for something to fill the cavity she had created. The second tape was worse. The cultists had progressed in their self-mutilation, their faces now unrecognizable as human. They knelt in their circle, heads tilted back, and their hollowed mouths gaped like empty wells. Something was moving in those cavities, not flesh or bone, but shadows that seemed to possess independent motion. The shadows writhed with purpose, reaching upward from the depths of destroyed throats towards some unseen presence above. Children appeared in the third recording, their small faces bearing the same expression of terrible understanding that had marked their parents. They approached the circle of kneeling adults with kitchen knives clutched in their tiny hands. The oldest, a boy of perhaps 10, stepped forward first. His movements were mechanical, puppet-like, as though something else was guiding his actions. Lucas forced himself to watch as the child began his work. The boy's hands moved with inhuman precision, carving away his lips, his cheeks, the soft tissue of his palate. Blood cascaded down his chin, but he never paused. His eyes remained fixed on the camera, and through the recording, they seemed to look directly at Lucas, with an intelligence far older than any child should possess. The final frame of the last tape showed the boy after his transformation was complete. His face was a hollow ruin, a cavity that extended impossibly deep into his skull. But somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. His remaining eye fixed on the camera lens with perfect clarity, and his lips, what remained of them, began to move. Lucas watched the recording in reverse, slowing the playback until he could make out the shape of the words. The child's voice, when it finally emerged from the speakers, was not his own. It was something ancient and patient, something that had been waiting in the darkness beneath the earth for time beyond measure. "We were just the vessels," the voice whispered, each word carefully formed, despite the ruin of the mouth that spoke them. "The real mouths open next." The recording ended. In the sudden silence that followed, Lucas became aware of a sound that had been present throughout his exploration, but which he had dismissed as the natural acoustics of the cavern system. It was breathing, slow, rhythmic, impossibly vast. The walls themselves seemed to expand and contract with each inhalation, as though the entire cavern was the interior of some massive lung. He turned his headlamp toward the altar, and in its pale light, he saw that the flowstone formation had changed. What had resembled an open mouth now gaped wider, its stone throat extending down into the earth beyond the reach of his light. The breathing sound grew stronger, and with it came the realization that something was rising from the depths below. Lucas ran. His feet slipped on the wet stone as he raced toward the flooded entrance, but behind him, the breathing continued, patient, eternal, utterly alien. As he plunged into the dark water and began his ascent toward the surface world, he could feel the weight of that presence pressing against his mind. By the time he reached the surface, gasping and shivering in the pale morning light, Lucas understood with crystalline clarity what the cultists had discovered in their underground sanctum. God did not dwell above the earth in celestial glory. God dwelt below, in the spaces between spaces, in the hollow places where sound could not travel and light could not penetrate. The cultists had not been destroyed by their faith. They had been prepared by it, transformed into the instruments through which something infinitely patient could finally begin its ascent toward a world that had forgotten the true meaning of worship. As Lucas stumbled away from the cavern entrance, his mouth began to ache with a hunger he had never felt before. Deep in his throat, something stirred, not flesh, but the shadow of an absence that yearned to be filled. He opened his lips to scream, but no sound emerged. The real mouths were opening.
Dear digital voyeurs,
Gather close as we reflect upon tonight's delectable morsel of subterranean terror. In The Hollowing, you descended with rescue diver Noah Lucas into the limestone bowels of St. Bartholomew's Caverns, where you discovered 23 devoted cultists had found that true communion with the divine requires not opening one's heart, but rather excavating one's mouth. You witnessed how these faithful souls methodically carved away their faces, transforming themselves into hollow vessels, not to receive God's word, but to become the very throat through which something ancient and patient might finally speak. As you watched Lucas view their recorded descent into sacred mutilation, the horrifying realization dawned that the cultists weren't destroyed by their faith. They were lovingly prepared as instruments for an entity that dwells not in heaven's heights, but in the spaces between spaces below. With endless chatter and digital noise, salvation would require the ultimate silence, becoming an empty mouth for something that has been waiting eons to finally have its say.
If you found yourself stirred, unsettled, or just a bit more wary of shadows, consider offering a like to feed the entity that powers these tales. And should you subscribe, you may yet survive to hear the next whisper from the void.